Today's panelists include Wendy Naus, who is the Executive Director of the Consortium for Social Sciences Associations. As well, we're also joined by Kenzie Shellstad, who is a Government Relations Associate, and we'll be having our program moderated by Benjamin Goodrich, who is APSA's Associate Director of Government Relations and Public Engagement. As one of the founding associations of COSSA and a member of the governing associations, APSA is grateful to Wendy and to the COSSA staff for their continued partnership and leadership in advocating for social and behavioral sciences and research and for STEM research. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Ben.
Thank you so much, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of APSA, I'd like to welcome you to our teaching webinar, Guiding Principles for Advocating for Political Science. As Kim mentioned, my name is Ben Goodrich. I'm APSA's Associate Director for Government Relations and Public Engagement. I'm pleased to be moderating today's session, as well as the following Q&A, and give a little bit of an overview of APSA's advocacy program and how you as members of APSA can get more involved. Before we get started with the main session today, I'd like to take a few minutes to go over some important housekeeping items. First of all, we ask all participants of this webinar adhere to APSA's Respect Campaign. The Respect Campaign encourages professional respect to, by, and towards all APSA event attendees and participants at all times. Respect stands for respectful, equitable, safe, professional, and ethical conduct towards all. The APSA Sexual Harassment Survey Report, Anti-Harassment Policy, and Code of Conduct all addresses the importance of facilitating a climate of respect at all APSA events. You can learn more about the Respect Campaign and the Code of Conduct on APSA's website. Throughout the event today, you should feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions during the presentation. We'll be recording this event, and we will be making it available on APSA's website shortly after we conclude. You also have the ability to enable closed captioning using the menu option at the bottom of your screen. The first 60 minutes of today's webinar is dedicated to our main presentation, which will be led by Wendy Naus. Afterwards, we will be having another 30 minutes available for question and answer session, as well as an overview of our advocacy efforts. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our main presenter for the day, Wendy Naus from COSSA. Wendy Naus became the Executive Director of COSSA in 2014, following a decade of lobbying for the federal research and policy interests of scientific societies and U.S. universities. Over her career, she has worked to shape legislation, programs, and regulations important to the research community and has advocated for increased research funding across federal agencies. In her role at COSSA, Wendy serves as the lead advocate for federal funding and policy that positively impacts social and behavioral science research across the federal government, representing the breadth of the social science research enterprise. She is also responsible for the day-to-day operations of COSSA and member engagement. Thank you for presenting for today's event, Wendy, and I will let you take it away from here.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Mealy, Ben, and APSA for having me today, and to everyone for tuning in. As Ben said, I'm Wendy Naus, and I'm Executive Director of the Consortium of Social Science Associations. And I have been working in the advocacy space for more than 20 years in Washington, always, though, during that period, advocating for different aspects of the research enterprise. I also have with me today two other COSSA staff members, Elise Bailey and Kenzie Shellstad. Let's start by a quick pop quiz. Can you name the founding father who is pictured on your screen? You can put your answers in the chat if you have an idea. Yes, that was our fourth president, James Madison, who is considered the father of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Because today we'll be talking about your constitutional right to engage with those elected to represent you and how to do it well and where you can start. Here's a quick look at the plan for today. We'll go through some of this pretty quickly, but you should know that you can find lots more information in COSSA's Advocacy Handbook, shown on your screen. And Kenzie will help us by providing some links in the chat. We'll pause after each section for a quick questions and answer, but we should have a full 30 minutes at the end for a deeper discussion. You'll notice that we do not plan to talk about specifics of today's fraught political environment, like research funding or grant terminations. But I'm happy to discuss these at the end if there are any questions. But again, you can look to COSSA's reporting for details on all of that. Let me start by saying a quick word about who COSSA is. We're a consortium, as our name suggests, of 13 disciplinary or interdisciplinary associations representing the lion's share of the social and behavioral science research community. And APSA is a founding member of COSSA dating back to the early 1980s. As an APSA member, you participating today are already a COSSA member and can subscribe to our resources. But if you don't see your home institution on this list, we would love to welcome you and your organization or other organizations you may be affiliated with to the COSSA family. Just so you can understand where we're coming from today, this is a quick snapshot of some of the work we do on behalf of the social and behavioral science community. Our mission is to promote the value of social and behavioral science research to policymakers and the public with the goal of enhancing federal support. That's the mission that we have worked toward since our earliest days, at a time when funding for social and behavioral science research was being cut. We organized for the purpose of saving social science research funding. But today we have the luxury of being proactive as well, not just playing defense when funding threats are out there. So the work that we do is in service of this mission and generally falls into three buckets. There's COSSA's advocacy, which is me and my team as lobbyists going to the Hill, engaging directly with Congress, developing champions among members of Congress, informing legislation, and also engaging with the executive branch. The second piece is member engagement, and this is where you all come in. We promote grassroots advocacy and give the tools and resources that you need to be an effective advocate, like today's webinar. We issue action alerts that alert you to when is the best time to engage in advocacy. And we do things like Social Science Advocacy Day, which I'll talk more about later. And the third part of our strategy is public outreach. And this is really where we're trying to help the public gain a better understanding and hopefully appreciation for social and behavioral science research and how it impacts everyone's daily lives. We, through this method, want to not only message the importance of social and behavioral science, but hopefully get the public engaged in advocacy on behalf of this work. We do all of this because our hope is that someday we'll live in a world where elected officials not only embrace science to inform public policy, but they know where to find it. And that's where you come in. Whether you are taking some kind of action on your own or participating in an advocacy activity as part of your professional society or university, whether you have never advocated on policy before, or if you're a seasoned vet, our goals for today are to provide strategies that will set your efforts apart from others and help you make the most of the experience. So we'll do that by strengthening the quality of our interactions, focusing on relationship building versus transactional communication, and exploring ways to become a trusted resource to your elected officials. Now, a quick disclaimer. I will be talking about the federal government in a lot of my examples today, but many of these strategies can be used for other levels of government, such as state legislatures. So we should begin by dispelling some myths about advocacy. The one I hear most often is, I'm not allowed to advocate, which of course is not true, thanks to President Madison and the Bill of Rights. There is a significant difference between the official definitions of lobbying versus advocating. Anyone can communicate with their policymakers on issues they care about. The US government has a very specific definition of lobbying, which requires individuals to register with Congress as a lobbyist. And those who were around a decade or two ago, when there was quite a lot of controversy around high-paid lobbyists, and some of whom who had served prison time as a result of that, there really has been, as a result, a lack of understanding the difference between lobbying and advocacy. But lobbying is really someone who is employed or retained by a client for financial or other compensation, and whose services include more than one lobbying contact, and whose lobbying activities constitute 20% or more of his or her services time on behalf of that client. So if you're ever told, no, you shouldn't engage with your elected officials because you'll have to register as a lobbyist, you won't. If you're unsure if you qualify as a lobbyist according to this definition, you probably don't. I also hear quite often that I have a federal grant and therefore cannot lobby, which is also not true. You just have to be extra careful about what you talk about and to never use grant funding, federal grant funding, for advocacy purposes, which includes travel. Now, all this being said, sometimes faculty in a university will be asked to engage with the congressional delegation without first coordinating with your government relations office. This is generally a good practice to check in with your government or federal relations office about any upcoming advocacy plans. It's also good to just simply introduce yourself to the government relations representatives for your school and express to them your interest in advocating on behalf of research. You might be surprised that they will take you up on this offer and engage you in their own efforts to advocate on behalf of the institution. Myth number 2, advocacy undermines the science. We also hear a lot that research should stand on its own merits and that you are somehow diminishing the science if you advocate. But scientists and scholars really should use their power as a constituent and a scientist or a researcher. Scientists and scholars tend to think that passion isn't scientific and that expressing it somehow undermines the science. But when we're talking about a policy audience, elected officials respond to stories. They respond to learning why you entered a science career and what drives you in your work. So this is, again, a false statement that advocacy undermines the science. You have more power as a researcher and a constituent. Now, of course, recent efforts by the Trump administration to terminate research funding at US universities has put researchers and students in a challenging situation when it comes to advocacy. We don't want to diminish that. You may be advised by your university administration to not use your university email address and affiliation when communicating with Congress. And that's okay. These are unusual times that call for special care. So if you are asked to not use your university affiliation, or if you're just nervous and unsure about it, send your message from your personal account. Myth number 3, Special interests control everything. In other words, there are larger forces at play with more power and influence. Therefore, my message will be drowned out, so why should I bother? Special interest groups might have a negative connotation, but in reality, special interest groups are simply groups of citizens who are organized around a common purpose, and therefore science is a special interest group. And that's a good thing, and we should use it to our advantage. Most interactions between citizens and Congress are facilitated by groups like COSSA or APSA, companies, trade organizations, etc. Why? This is because Congress makes decisions locally, not nationally. Interest groups take national issues, such as healthcare, for example, and bring them down to the local level where the policymaker will listen and can act. Number 4, my participation won't make a difference, similar to the previous myth. In other words, I'm just one person. Why should I bother? Well, let's think about it. Why are there so many hired lobbyists in Washington? It's because there's a general lack of interest on the part of the public in engaging with their elected officials. Even getting people to vote is hard. So imagine if your elected officials had an expert in their home state or district who they could go to for advice and expertise. The media only reports on the big policy issues that divide us. For example, whether to raise taxes or to lower taxes, whether to support Obamacare or disband Obamacare. But in reality, the vast majority of decisions a member of Congress makes are not black and white in terms of ideology or party position. Many of the decisions, if not most, are on small locally relevant issues that make gradual changes around the edges. You may be surprised by the many ways you can help inform your elected officials' decision-making. Number 5, I must know how a bill becomes a law. In other words, I must have some experience with government or policy in order to be an effective advocate. Unfortunately, as the decades have passed, the American people have become more and more distanced from government and policymaking. This leaves many believing that engaging in advocacy is reserved for political scientists only, or those already steeped or interested in policy discussions. The truth is that your job when advocating is to make the case for your issue. In our case, why social science research funding is in the national interest and why you, Congress, should act on it and why we should be considered a resource to that policymaker. It is not your job to memorize funding levels that we're requesting or learn the intricacies of policymaking or know the status of every bill related to your topic. No, the truth is your job is to talk about what you know. Organizations like APSA and COSSA exist to be the experts in these other areas. Finally, myth number 6. I must come to Washington in order to be an effective advocate. And of course, this is false. Every action helps, even though, as I discussed earlier, it may not always feel like it. You're just one person. But in this current environment, especially, grassroots advocacy is critical. And so that means taking a simple action like calling or emailing your elected officials or meeting them in the state, attending a town hall or attending a peaceful rally or march. So the tips and strategies we're going to share with you can be used during in-person meetings, virtual meetings, phone calls, emails, and they can also be used, as I said at the outset, when engaging with state or local officials. Shown on the screen is COSSA's at-home advocacy guide, and I'll talk more about that as we get into some more strategies. So before we move on, we wanted to take a moment to see if there are any questions, but it doesn't look like there are at this point. So we'll move on. It's important to understand the advocacy context and how we all fit into that. I emphasize effective advocacy in this section because there is a lot of ineffective grassroots advocacy out there. Here's a snapshot of what we're up against. According to data collected in 2024, $4.5 billion was spent on official lobbying activities. Official meaning these are the amounts expended for lobbying as reported by registered lobbyists. It does not include other efforts like you coming to Washington to engage with your elected officials, because that's not a paid lobbying activity, or responding to an action alert from COSSA or APSA in which you call or email your member of Congress. So you can imagine how much these numbers would grow if unofficial advocacy activities were added in. Also, there are about 13,000 active registered lobbyists, and that number grows every single year. And the folks that we're advocating to and engaging with are very busy people, and with the number of lobbyists increasing and advocates increasing, their time becomes even more precious. And that's because a typical congressional staffer could receive more than 200 emails a day from constituents asking for something. And they could have up to a dozen meetings every single day with different interest groups. So we are just one voice among all of the different constituencies that are looking to engage with elected officials. And so the challenge is, how can we be heard among the crowd? In the end, federal funding is a zero-sum game, so we cannot expect others to carry our message for us. It's just critical that we show up. So we know what doesn't work for effective advocacy. We know that silence and complacency doesn't work. No one's going to take our message for us. We know that quote unquote phone it in advocacy doesn't work. And this is really related to the explosion of grassroots advocacy over the last 30 years, thanks to technology. This refers to, in a lot of ways, some of the efforts by organizations to engage their grassroots by different platforms that allow you to send form emails and messages to Congress that are identical. In other words, you could simply put in your zip code or your address, and a message to Congress would pre-populate. It would sign your name at the bottom and send it off. And while, yes, COSSA has that ability, and we use that from time to time as well, that is one means to the end. But for many advocates and advocacy organizations, that is how they measure their advocacy success, by the number of form letters that are sent to Congress. But as the explosion of grassroots advocacy has really increased over the last 30 years, the quality of those interactions really have not improved, thanks to the tactics like developing these new technologies. We also know that just having one meeting or one phone call or email, while it contributes and every action matters, taking one single action isn't going to get us there. If you take nothing away from this webinar except this, know that the secret sauce of effective advocacy is understanding your audience. We'll go into more detail, but in general, science can just be seen as another interest group, another player with an axe to grind. In addition, science in particular may bump up against a policymaker's ideology or religion or worldview. Generally, a policy audience cares about what's happening in their constituency. They care about getting reelected, and their values and their beliefs overlay everything. It's unrealistic to assume that science and facts can override any of these. In fact, many believe if lawmakers were just more science literate, they would agree with me and automatically take action on my science-based issue. And yes, that is false. While it's true that we do need more scientists serving in public office, it's not fair to assume that non-scientist officials just need to be educated about the science. If they wanted to know the science, they would have entered a science career. They may not have an interest or a capacity to learn a topic as well as you. So explaining the science might be interesting to them, but it's not going to move them to act in most cases. Instead, what we should be doing is aiming to spark science curiosity instead of increasing science knowledge or literacy. We'll talk more about your audience when talking about messaging in the next section. So moving on, we're going to transition to talking about how to craft a persuasive message with everything in mind that we just discussed. Here's a little bit of data to help make the case for effective communication and messaging. So this table is a little dated at this point, but still fairly accurate. It asks, how helpful is it for messages from constituents to include the following? And this is a survey of congressional staffers. So that's the dark blue line. The light blue line is how frequently do messages from constituents include the following? So at the top is information about the impact the bill would have on the district or state. In other words, what are the local impacts that I'm hearing from constituents about a bill or an action that I'm about to take? But only 9% of respondents say that they receive messages from constituents about the local impacts of a bill or a policy. In addition, respondents noted that personal stories related to the issue or the bill are very helpful when engaging with constituents to help the lawmaker decide how to vote. But in this case, only 18% of messages from constituents actually use a personal story related to the issue. So instead, let's give them what they're asking for. When meeting with a government official or writing to a government official, the person on the other end will be thinking two things when engaging with you. One, how does this issue affect and or help the state, the district, or the elected official themselves? And two, what is the constituent asking me to do? An effective message will answer both of these questions. The key to a winning message is recognizing that it's not all about you. It's about establishing credibility, which is about you, and giving your audience a reason to care, which is all about them. The biggest misstep that advocates make, including many professional lobbyists, is that their message is all about why you, the audience, needs to listen to what I'm telling you, and not about why what I'm telling you is relevant to your needs. Elected officials make decisions based on lots of different things: political pressure, partisan politics, financial pressure, local politics, public interest, personal interest. For example, maybe you want to talk with your member of Congress about why increased funding is needed for the National Science Foundation. Instead of coming in with all of the statistics about investments at NSF and specific data on what has been yielded from that, your audience will want to know the story, the real impact. So you can transform a discussion about science funding into a conversation about real people and their lives. Or you could take a jobs angle and talk about how many jobs are provided by the research as a result, either as a result of the research or in doing the research itself. Maybe students contribute. Are there specific populations affected by your research or a certain policy? How does the issue or policy affect funding to the state and local economy? Economic arguments are always valued, especially in a member of Congress's office. And so can you share any real life stories? And that won't be true for area of research. I recognize that. But we are not talking to a scientific audience when talking with policymakers. They really want to feel a personal connection. And that is how we're going to craft a winning message. Our at-home advocacy guide contains a worksheet at the end to help you develop an effective message by getting you to think about what your story is, what your audience cares about, and how your story connects with your audience's needs. So that's all I'll say about that at this point. I wanted to say a quick word about what issues you may want to advocate about. So maybe you're attending today because you already know the topic you'd like to raise with elected officials. Maybe you've had a grant terminated and you want to go talk about that and what that has meant for you, your career, or the research. Or perhaps outside of your academic career, there's a personal interest that you'd like to engage on. Or maybe you've received a call from APSA or COSSA or another organization calling on you to act in a certain way. Or it's possible that you know you want to start engaging in advocacy, but you don't really have a specific topic. You just know that you need to do something. And so there are ways to get and stay informed. Again, our at-home advocacy guide provides tips on how to become informed, which can help you determine what issue is most in need of your action. Because there is no shortage of social science issues in need of support at this moment. We encourage you also to engage with your professional society and or your institution or university. That might help guide your decision-making in what issues are of most urgent concern. And know that there are so many free resources out there for you, including from COSSA, such as our biweekly newsletter, the COSSA Washington Update, and COSSA Action Alerts. There, like I said, and you, I'm sure, fully understand, there's no shortage of issues in need of support today, including federal funding for research, presidential executive orders that we've seen over the last year, research grant and program terminations, and reductions in force, which are the federal workforce firings, just to name a few. But again, by staying informed, you can learn more about what the challenge of the day is and what should take priority in your advocacy. I'll end today by talking about how to put everything together. This is our at-home advocacy guide, which is free to the public and available on our website. It includes things that you can do to dip your toe into the policy process, as well as some larger actions that you can take. If you're new to federal advocacy or engaging with elected officials at any level, the first step is to learn about the policy issues confronting the research enterprise and the positions and priorities of your elected officials. This starts by gaining a better understanding of who represents your community in the United States Congress and identifying news sources that are trustworthy. Finding news sources that you trust is absolutely critical, and they should be fact-based and impartial and enable you to formulate your own positions. You should find and learn about your elected officials. You can do that by subscribing to their newsletters or following them on social media. Now, of course, that's all curated information about what the policymaker wants their constituency to know. But it's also incredibly helpful to read about their backgrounds, their bios, their positions, and their committee assignments to get an understanding of not only what they care about, but perhaps they sit on a key committee that could potentially take action on an issue that's important to us. I wanted to note that COSSA has a brand new resource to help you in your efforts, and it's called COSSA 101, a crash course on the federal government. And what we're trying to achieve here is to break down some of the wonky government terms or actions and to explain why they matter for social and behavioral science research. So you can find these on our website. We've started with a timely topic, which is what is a government shutdown and what can it mean for social science research? But we'll also have briefs coming out on the appropriations process and continuing resolutions and executive orders. So stay tuned for those. Level 2 in our advocacy at-home guide is to take a simple action. Respond to a call for action. Now, this is what I referenced earlier with you receiving an alert and having technology that allows you to send a form message or a pre-populated message to Congress. Yes, COSSA does this as well. But when we send our action alerts, we encourage you to tailor the pre-populated message, really just using our language as a template and making it more personal, as we've discussed throughout today, to local issues or interests of the policymaker. You can check your professional associations websites to see if they have an action page, and obviously go to COSSA's action page and share these calls for action with others. Another simple action you can take is just simply calling your elected officials. And for Congress, we go into in our guide whether it makes sense to call the local in-state office or the Washington, D.C. office. But you don't need to wait for a call to action from COSSA or another organization in order to communicate with your elected officials. If there's a topic you would like to discuss or a concern you have about a timely federal policy or action, you can call your lawmakers anytime. You can also email with your elected officials. It's important to make sure that you have the right contact when doing that. And so the guide goes into detail on how you can find the right person to reach out to, recognizing that you likely won't be emailing the member of Congress themselves, but instead the staff person who is assigned the portfolio that includes the issue you care about. And the third section of our guide is level 3, big actions. These are actions that, despite the name, are accessible to everyone, even if you're new to advocacy. They take a bit more time and effort, but each one can make a big impact. One example is to schedule an in-person meeting. Now, as I'm sure you know, as political scientists, members of Congress split their time between their duties in Washington, D.C. and back home in their state and district. There are week-long or several weeks-long recess periods throughout the year where all members of the House and/or Senate are working locally. In addition, Congress always breaks for the month of August. These are all excellent opportunities to seek an in-person meeting with your elected officials. If you're subscribed to your representative or senator's newsletters, as we suggest in level 1, you will have an idea of when your members of Congress will be home in the district. They may also include details of events they'll be attending that are open to constituents. A lot of in-district or state meetings happen during recess periods, but there's no reason not to request a meeting at other points throughout the year. But it is, when talking about an in-person meeting, very important to understand the difference between the local offices and DC offices. Every member of Congress has at least one office in their state or district. Senators will have more than one office since they are elected to represent statewide. As you might think, local offices are responsible for working more closely with constituents. They include district directors or caseworkers whose job it is to discuss local issues and engage directly with constituents on topics of immediate concern to them. It may not include large legislative or policy topics such as increased funding for the National Science Foundation. However, if you do meet locally, you could discuss how such funding cuts to NSF could impact the local universities or the local economy or whatever. Washington, D.C. offices, on the other hand, are populated with legislative staff whose job it is to craft legislation, to engage with constituents and the public on that legislation to help inform its design, and to inform their boss on how they might vote on a certain issue. So the guide goes into more detail about when it's important to meet locally versus in Washington, D.C. But you should think about that when thinking about what topic you want to advocate on. Is it a local issue or is it a national policy issue? The goal when having an in-person meeting should be building a relationship and presenting yourself as a resource to the office. The best meetings, whether locally or in DC, feel like a conversation with a friend. Don't just talk about yourself. Ask about them. You may find areas of natural synergy. At the end of the day, developing champions for our issues comes down to developing trusting relationships. Another big action is attending a town hall meeting in your state or district. Elected officials will host town hall meetings in their local districts, inviting constituents to share any concerns or issues of importance to them. We see this often when there are big issues being debated, such as healthcare or tax legislation. But unlike other meetings that you might have individually, the legislator, the elected official themselves, is guaranteed to be in attendance, which provides a rare opportunity for face-to-face engagement. In addition, media outlets often attend, which allows your comments to get on the record. So we go into detail in the at-home advocacy guide about how to craft a message that will resonate in a town hall. For example, we want to have questions that are calm, clear, and elicit a clear answer and commitment. Unfortunately, what we see on the news are town hall meetings that end in shouting matches and can get confrontational. But we want to use the opportunity to communicate with the policymaker in a way that allows us to get some clarity on their position and hopefully a commitment to act. You can prepare your question ahead of time, and we encourage that you do and write it down. We want you to make sure your question is concise and fact-based and direct, and get straight to the point by avoiding a long preamble and technical jargon. Attention to phrasing can help you ensure you receive a straight answer to your questions. For example, can we count on you to fight for strong funding for science agencies? Or what would you say to students who want to pursue science careers but don't see a future given the cuts to science funding? Phrasing your question in these ways will elicit a specific kind of answer from them. An extra credit level in our advocacy at-home guide is to participate in an in-person Hill Day in Washington, D.C. Now, of course, It's important to remember you don't have to come to Washington to be an advocate. But it is really valuable, I think, to take advantage of the opportunities that are given to you, either through APSA or COSSA, to come to Washington and to have these conversations with policymakers and their staff. COSSA has an advocacy day each year in the spring, and in 2026, it's scheduled for March 23rd and 24th. And we spend the first day coming together and talking about our messaging and engaging with others in the social science community to come up with our messages. And then the second day, you're on Capitol Hill meeting with members of Congress and their staff. But perhaps you're in Washington for another reason. Perhaps you're part of a peer review panel, or you're in town for a conference. You can tack a meeting or two onto your trip next time you're in Washington. It may seem foreign to you, but you can certainly call the Washington, D.C. office of your senator or House representative and ask for a meeting with the staff. And we go into that detail in our advocacy handbook. So to sum up, hopefully I've been able to articulate that advocacy can be a commitment of time and energy, and that policymakers turn to trusted experts and constituents to help inform their work. And that should be you. Grassroots advocacy has never been more important as it is right now. And getting started as an advocate is easy. I want to thank you for participating today and engaging with us on this. Here is how you can contact me. And here is where you can find additional resources about COSSA, about membership, and where you can find us on social media. So now I'll pass things back to Ben so we can start the discussion.
Great, thank you. It looks like we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A box and the chat. Also, first of all, apologies, I will be going screen off just in case internet connectivity is unstable. So please bear with me and let me know if I am cutting out. We have a question from Beth Simmons in the Q&A. I live in one of the most pro-science, pro-education congressional districts in the country. Does it ever make sense to advocate out of district?
That is an excellent question. A few things. One, most congressional offices will not take a meeting with someone who's not a constituent. You can, if you, for example, are planning some meetings with a group, or you want to engage, do some emails or town halls. If there's someone who does live in that district, you can join those activities with them. But they're just because they're so busy, they're very reticent to meet with people who are not constituents. That being said, many of you live and work in different congressional districts, and the audience, the office, they don't need to know where exactly you vote. They're not going to ask you that, nor can they. And so in your outreach for a meeting, for example, you could say, I'm up at the University of Pennsylvania and I want to meet with you. And maybe that is a different member than who represents your home. So that's certainly something that you can do.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have a question
from... I think I've heard of a couple organizations doing this, but I always like the idea of a buddy system as well. So if you live in a very pro-science area, but you know someone who maybe doesn't, feel free to offer to take them to a meeting. And so kind of like Wendy said, you don't have to tell the person you're meeting with that you don't live in that area if you're with someone who does. And maybe that person is, a little nervous to be doing it. Maybe it's their first time going to a meeting, and you can kind of make that easier for them and help them kind of lead the conversation and advocate in a meaningful way. I've heard of some groups doing that, and I think it's a really great idea, especially for, people who are new to advocacy that may need a little extra help. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
That's a great suggestion.
Great, and we have a question from Josh Franco in the chat. Have there been discussions of eliminating the social science exclusion to the federal research and development tax credit?
That's a good question. I have not seen that yet, although I'm not as plugged into tax policy. Tax policy, as I'm sure you saw in the big, beautiful bill, has really been more about tax exempt status and taking it away or tightening up that definition and or requiring nonprofits to pay for certain things that they don't normally pay for. But that's a great question, and I'm happy to look into that in more detail.
Great, and I have a question that I'd like to offer to the panel here. So many folks in the political science community may be interested in advocacy. However, their expertise may focus more on theoretical or conceptual aspects of political science, like political theory, or they may focus on possibly an international or comparative aspect of political science, or a regional focus of politics. Which there may be just inherent challenges then in translating a local impact to, for example, a member of Congress or a state legislator. If there are any tips or ideas you may have on how to effectively translate sort of bigger picture or more internationally focused political science research to a more local audience?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question and a very timely one, as we're all seeing cancellation of programs and grants that the president has deemed is not worthy of taxpayer support. So that challenge is just going to get worse in the near term. I would say a few things to that. If you're not able to make a local impact argument, and let me start by saying the local impact argument doesn't have to be that the research is local, but it employs people locally, meaning you have grad students that may lose their funding, or you have a big grant from the government. Even if you're in a very Republican district that supports the president, if you have a large federal grant that is at risk of being canceled, call your member of Congress, because they don't want the state to lose that money regardless of the topic. So that is very important. But I would also say, if I'm in meetings where I'm not able to make a local impact, oftentimes what I'll do is see if there's a common misconception about political science or internationally focused research that I can fix for them. There are so many meetings that I go into and they say, oh, hey, I have a degree in political science. I know what that means. But then we actually share more information about what the research entails. And, their mind is blown. They didn't expect that political science or sociology could be applied in different ways like that. And so really trying to focus on, is there a way to provide clarity or misconception debunking? The other thing I would say is, okay, you don't have a local connection. You can't think of a misconception. But in your research before reaching out to the office, you may have found that there is a pet issue that this member of Congress cares about. And it wouldn't be something you expect. Maybe someone is really interested in Africa and, they have a degree in it, or for whatever reason, they chair the Congressional Africa Caucus. And you would not have thought just by how they voted on things. So really doing your research to see there may be pet issues that also align. Finding that hook is going to be most important. But that is a really important question, Beth, because this is going to continue to be a challenge for a while, especially for various social sciences, not just political science.
Great, thank you so much. If there are any other questions that people may be chewing on, now would be a great time to throw it in the question and answer box below. I'll give just a beat to see if we get any last minute questions. And if not, please feel free to contact APSA after the fact. If you have any final questions, I'm happy to put you in contact with Wendy and Kenzie. They're very good at what they do. They're very happy to walk you through some of these steps in getting into advocacy. So again, thank you very much to both of you for your time. This was a very informative presentation. And I know that I hope everyone here learned a lot, and I hope they feel more comfortable dipping their toes into advocacy. So again, thank you. Before we wrap up the webinar, I'd like to take a few moments to pivot. 1 second, please. So I'd like to take a few moments just to talk about APSA's advocacy program. Some of you may or may not know that we do have an advocacy program, so I'd like to give some folks a few highlights of the activities that we typically offer and highlight some of the opportunities for our members to get more involved in some of the ways that Wendy already mentioned earlier. So first of all, I'd like to give a very brief overview of the main issues APSA typically follows. First and foremost, the health and defense of the academic discipline of political science and APSA's members. This can include highlighting the value of political science to policymakers, whether that's through individual meetings with members of Congress or highlighting in a public engagement capacity about the value of political science. It can include defending political scientists and political science departments from attacks or funding cuts. It can also mean promoting a diverse and inclusive academic environment for political scientists. We also try to support federal funding for programs, data, infrastructure that support political science, both researchers, educators, and those receiving an education in political science. This includes funding for agencies that we've referenced earlier in the webinar that directly provide grants to political scientists. This includes agencies like the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we also try to support agencies that host important infrastructure for researchers, such as the National Archives and Records Administration. I've been told I'm coming in and out, so I will do my best to slow down. It also includes the integrity of federal data and the statistical system, as well as independent peer review and protecting the nonpartisan nature of federal research grants when possible. And lastly, academic freedom for political science scholars and students. This includes ensuring protections for academic tenure, as well as, where we can, preventing political interference in political science curricula. So now I'd like to give a brief summary of some of the activities that we engage in that support our members. First, I'd like to talk about issuing and signing onto public statements and letters. Usually this is related to the priorities I listed earlier, federal funding, academic freedom, the health of the discipline of political science. But we do also periodically issue letters defending specific political scientists and departments that may be under attack. It also includes several community letters in which organizations may sign on to collectively express unified support for a specific policy. We've done this in the past in support for federal funding for agencies like the National Science Foundation. And there is a full list of statements and letters that APSA has issued or co-signed available on our website on the sub page titled Public Statements and Letters. So please go check that out if you're interested in learning more. Other issues that we do, we track and analyze legislation that is prudent to political science. Typically, this is the appropriations process, so tracking how much money is being allocated to specific federal programs, typically for higher education and research grants, in particular at the National Science Foundation. Periodically, we will write up analyses and summaries of these more important legislative proposals and how it may impact political science. These have been published in our quarterly Political Science Today member-facing magazine. And in the future, we are looking to distribute that through our advocacy mailing list, which I will be talking about in just a moment. We organize meetings with legislators and federal agency staff. Most commonly, these are check-ins with folks on Capitol Hill that are experts in the higher education or research funding spaces. And these are efforts to advance the value of political science, make connections with policymakers, and do our best to support the federal programs that are critical for political scientists. We coordinate policy efforts with partner organizations like COSSA. We share information and collaborate across disciplines and organizations to make sure that we are on the same page and working in a unified fashion for a stronger level of support on federal issues. And we do also try to amplify resources that are the many partner organizations and coalitions that we belong to that would be useful for our members to take advantage of, like, for example, COSSA's resources like the Washington Update newsletter and the headlines webinars that they put on. And then finally, facilitating public engagement events and programs. Congratulations, you are all participating in one of those right now. And we periodically will organize and support future programs for our members that help advance communication between political scientists and the general public, as well as policymakers and stakeholders. So how specifically can APSA members get more involved in APSA's advocacy program? First stop should be checking out our advocacy program website. This is our most visible platform for latest advocacy opportunities, events, and resources. That does include links to resources that we've curated and resources that are shared and by our partners like COSSA. I mentioned the Washington Update newsletter. It is a fantastic resource for folks who are interested in learning more about social science policy. And the headlines webinars, those are more programs that I encourage everyone to check out if they're interested. And you can find the platform for the advocacy program on our website under the subpage APSA's advocacy program. A new offering that I'd like to highlight is our brand new advocacy mailing list. This is an email list in which you will receive regular email updates with policy and advocacy news and opportunities. This is an opt-only list. So that does mean you will not receive those updates unless you choose to sign up through the opt-in link. That link is available on our advocacy program website and currently is hosted on our homepage. So if you are interested in getting more information about advocacy opportunities, or if you're interested in the legislative analyses that we will be putting out periodically, those will be through the advocacy mailing list. So please do opt into that if you're interested. Participate in future virtual events and public engagement opportunities. I've mentioned that this is one of those opportunities, so thank you for participating. When we do have future events, we will market them through the advocacy mailing list as well as through our newsletter and social media. So I hope that you join us for the next one when that is organized. As Wendy mentioned earlier, I hope that you all consider advocating in person, whether that is in Washington or in a more local fashion. We will share opportunities to engage in the advocacy days or Capitol Hill fly-ins, such as Social Science Advocacy Day. I hope you all consider joining Social Science Advocacy Day in the spring if you're able to. But also, if you do happen to be in Washington, whether for work or if you're just visiting, let us know if you're interested in taking a detour to have a couple meetings with your members of Congress on Capitol Hill we would be happy to help facilitate those. As long as you give us some advance notice, we're happy to help you out, or at least answer your questions, make it as easy as possible for you to do so. And finally, if you still are unsure how to get started with advocacy, if you still feel like the resources we've mentioned so far, you haven't, all of your questions haven't been answered during this webinar through these resources, you're potentially in need for more support from APSA, whatever that means, please feel free to reach out to us using the email listed on the screen, advocacy@apsanet.org. For any of those advocacy-related requests, we're happy to offer more specific advocacy support and guidance if you have any questions that are relevant to the priorities we've listed earlier in this webinar. And finally, once again, I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar. The recording will be posted and circulated afterwards in case you're interested in watching any portion of this event back. And please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. And again, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you at the next APSA webinar. Again, thank you so much.